Hi there, Pippa. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Emma. How are you?
I'm very well. So I know you, Pippa. We had a chat previously when I was considering home educating my children quite a while ago now. Could you introduce yourself to the audience at home?
My name is Pippa King, and I home educated two boys from 2010 and 2011 onwards. And they went to primary school. And whilst at primary school, the reason why I decided to home educate them for secondary education, at least, was because I got involved in a campaign um, where schools were fingerprinting children without parental consent. And this was in primary school, it was in their primary school. And I started to ask some questions of MPs and to get them to ask questions in Parliament through freedom of information requests. And I sort of worked with No to ID. This is back in 2004, 2005. And the little known parents' rights groups called Action on Rights for Children, of which a woman called Terry Doughty was running. And she was actually home educating her two children because through the course of the campaigning, when you're campaigning for kids' privacy, children's privacy in schools, you start to learn exactly what data schools are holding on your kids, what they're doing with it, who are they sharing it with, that parents aren't privy to. And she sort of gave me the confidence to send freedom of information requests, look at the critical information we were getting back from schools to where kids' data was going, and I made the decision in 2010 when my eldest had reached year 6 to not put them in secondary school. So luckily my two children were one school year apart, so it was a fairly easy slide to take them both into home education at the same time. So I still would have done it had they been 3 or 4 years apart, because they tend to mix as home educators with a whole range of other home educators that can be toddlers through to 16, 17-year-olds. And that's the experience we had home educating. So that's sort of how I made the decision to home educating. We were lucky really, because my husband at the time was a teacher in schools, as a music teacher in schools, working for the peripatetic service. So his day finished at 4 o'clock and I was teaching piano in the evening. So that's sort of when my day started. So I had the children sort of from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock, and then he sort of took over after that. So I think looking back, if I had had them on me 24/7, it would have been a different experience for all of us home educating. But it worked well for us in the situation we were in, that I could work sort of evenings and late afternoons, and he could work sort of during the day. So we were lucky really, and so that's the reason how I came into home education.
So when your two boys finished primary school, did you get any resistance from them when their friends were going to secondary school? Did they want to go to secondary school, or was that not really an issue?
No, the primary school they went to didn't wasn't feeding a particular secondary school. So all the
Okay.
children in year 6 were splitting off and going to different schools in the area. So there was no big group of them going to one particular school. So everybody was having a new experience. And so to take my two out just was another new experience for them. And I think a lot of mums sort of looked at me in the playground and said, "Aren't you nervous about doing this?" And I suppose I was really, because you're stepping out of the box, out of the norm. Nobody really tells you about home education, because it's just things that other people do. And if you get to hear about it, and it wasn't that prolific, I think when we were doing it, there were maybe 60 to 70,000 children out of the home education system back in 2010, and out of a school population of 9.5 to 10 million children, that's not a lot. I gather that figure's an awful lot higher now. So, but the person that I had courage to do it from was Terry Doughty, because she was home educating her two children at the time, and she actually wrote two books on home education, and she had two boys, and I know one of them went on to study maths. One of them went to Oxford, and one of them went to, I think, a university in Leeds. But they were very high achievers, and certainly my two are now in their late 20s, and both went on to Russell Group universities and got great degrees, and it hasn't affected their long-term education at all. In fact, I would rather suggest it's enhanced it, because of their ability to adapt and communicate. I think a little, I wouldn't say better, but differently to state educated children that have been in school. I think especially state schools.
So
That's
your
given them.
two Sorry, yeah. So your
But no,
two went through the primary. Generally speaking, how did you find primary school?
well, it was interesting because the primary school we decided to send them to wasn't a particular academic primary school. It was a primary school that was feeding the university in Hull. So a lot of the children there were transient from visiting professors. It was a very small school. There was one class per year group, and lots of different languages. And there was really a community school. The head teacher was sort of getting ready to retire back then, and she had sort of resisted the urge to make it terribly academic driven. And the other school we had an option to send them to was a school of about 600 kids, as opposed to the primary school they were going to, which was 160 children. And that other sort of school was very academically driven. And my husband had the advantage of being a peripatetic music teacher, going in and out of these primary schools and sort of getting the feel of them. And we, based on the more community feel of the primary school, we put them in that primary school. But it was interesting because when I remember the first week, I took my eldest out, and we would get up and we'd be sat ready to go at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we had formal learning, maths, English, science from 9 till midday, and after that we'd do whatever other home educators were doing, or if we were gardening, cooking, going for a walk, catching the train somewhere, going shopping, whatever. And I remember him sitting there at 9 o'clock the first morning, waiting to be spoon-fed this education, because that's what he'd experienced. You sit down at primary school and the teacher comes and she spoon feeds you what you need to know. And and after sort of about half an hour, I said, this isn't working. And I'm not going to be spoon feeding this. We just need to get curious. And that's what we did. We did work from, I think it was at the time W.H. Smith did the Key Stage, I think 3 or 4 as it was at the time, books. And we were following these big books just to take the maths, science and English, because those are the basic GCSEs we thought they'd need. And we got through that, but it was, we'd sort of easily branch off and look at other things, and it was entirely healthy to do that. And you begin to realize as a home educator that you don't, you can have specifically maths, English and science, but all the other subjects, the humanities and the arts, sort of overlap so much that you can't sort of put it in a box. And that's what the difference of the home education to a sort of school education is, that you start to apply the knowledge you learn, rather than just put it in a box somewhere in your head and then regurgitate it for an exam. You can actually think about the geography and the historical and the political and the climate and what they're eating, and sort of join all those dots together, which I don't think, because I'm a teacher myself and I still teach piano and I teach secondary school pupils, that sort of knowledge isn't so much there. Everything's compartmentalized, whereas with home educators it tends not to be. It's very much a generalization, but I would say that is definitely the case. And so as a consequence, when they went off to do their university interviews, and because they're used to dealing with other adults, older children, younger children, their interview skills, I think, were very, very good. They were quite able to hold a conversation and articulate and navigate around different areas of
Very good.
topics. Yeah.
Yeah. So how old were they when they went back into mainstream education?
So they both came out at year 6 in 2010 and 2011. And then so they had year 7, 8 and 9 home educated. And at the end of year 9, I went to the local 14 to 19 college. Pardon me. And we had a meeting with the principal, took the boys in and said, you've got these 2 home educators coming to you in 2 years' time at the end of year 11. What do we need to do to have them come in and take their A-levels? Because we hadn't decided at that point whether they were still going to home educate and take A-levels as remote exams, which they could do, or to go into the 6th form. And they very kindly said, well, why don't they come in at year 10 and 11 and sit the resit exams that people coming into the college at 16 will be taking because they failed their maths and English. But
Yeah.
So basically they part schooled for year 10 and 11, sort of about half time, doing, I think 1 year they did maths and English, and the second year they did the 2 sciences. And it was really interesting because they'd had their primary school education and they'd had their home educated 3 years, sort of not being in school. And when they both went in to do these exams, and granted, the resits are a bit of a regurgitation exam because they're dealing with students that have already sat through 2 years of things, so they just really want to cram it and get them to sit the exam. They were just saying, "What we're doing is jumping through hoops. We're not learning anything." And I was just saying, "Well, okay, this is what education is, and this is what you're going to have to do to get your A levels and to get into university. It's almost like playing a game." Say,
Yeah,
it was interesting because my two children had had an experience of primary, home educating, and then going back in at higher, and they saw all the different types of education, and they adapted absolutely fine to every single one, but they were under no illusions what the higher education, sort of GCSEs onwards was. I mean, I think A levels are a little different because you're actually studying a subject that you want to study, and the tutors are more streamlined for that. But certainly when they went in to sit their maths and science and English GCSEs, they literally were just memorizing and regurgitating, and they knew that. They saw that
yeah,
quite clear.
yeah.
So well, that was probably an interesting step for them to take on their A levels, to know that's what they needed to do, but also as well, they also had this sort of broader spectrum that they could pull upon. But I'm sure other kids can as well, but certainly home educated kids can do that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. It's interesting for them to compare and to come to their own conclusions of what education is and the value of it, and to decide if they want to pursue jumping through the hoops. Perhaps when it's, when you know what you're aiming for, perhaps it's worthwhile doing it at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting because they were both big kids. I mean, at the age of 14 and 15, they were over 6 foot, both of them. So when they went into the 14 to 19 college, they blended in quite well. So that
Right.
was good. And because they were attending bands and orchestras and playing squash locally with older kids, quite a few of their friends that they were meeting out of school were at the college. And so it was a very easy transition for them to go and take those GCSEs and just slide into the A level courses.
Yeah.
It might be an issue with other families. Really, that was the route that we took. And
Yeah.
so because that particular college wanted 5 GCSEs and they were only taking us through 4 of them, we had to then look at remote to 1 GCSE each. So my eldest studied astronomy at GCSE because there are about 400 GCSEs out there, or there were back then. And there's a vast range of GCSEs in many subjects that you can take, but obviously schools were limited to 10, 14 or whatever it is. And my youngest decided to study law at GCSE. He didn't know what to study, so we suggested, okay, you're going to grow up and live in civic society. Why don't you learn about civic society? So he did law at GCSE, and that worked out for them both. And it wasn't horribly expensive for us to do those GCSEs tutor wise. And only the college that they were doing their maths and English GCSEs very kindly said, yes, you can sit those exams here at whatever time they agreed with the examining board. And so that was, we had
Yeah.
it was good that the local college was very accommodating for us in that.
Accommodating.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I think you were quite
sorry,
lucky
go on.
there because I don't think it's quite the same. I've certainly found it a lot more difficult to find access the examinations where I am. We have to outsource them. I've contacted local schools and colleges, and they're not willing to take in younger students anymore. That door seems to have closed, certainly where I am anyway.
Well, the particular college they went to was a 14 to 19. So
Right.
if it's a post 16 and they're below 16, for insurance purposes, they wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to take
Okay.
them. So I mean, there's quite, I don't know what the landscape of it is of 14 to 19 colleges now, but
Yeah, interesting.
that was the route that we pursued. And it was interesting because I was thinking about them possibly accessing adult education evening courses. And again, that wasn't possible for them because they weren't adults, and it's a different age thing, and it all goes on a different government database, and you're not allowed to do that. So
Well,
that
that's
was like,
interesting, Pippa, because I'll look into that, the colleges for 14 to 19, because I'm not even aware. I wasn't really aware that such a thing existed. So I'll find out where my nearest one is because that could be useful.
yeah. And even if they might even do remote lessons from them. I wasn't sure, and maybe I could do freedom of information. You could do a freedom of information request to any 14 to 19 college to see if they get government funded. I wasn't sure whether they were getting government funding for my two children. Me, just recovering from a cold, so it may have been that 14 to 19 particular college was getting a proportion of the funding. Each child has X amount of thousands of pounds as they walk through the door into. So it could be that they were accessing some funding for them. I didn't ask at the time, but certainly freedom of information request. I mean, to any 14 to 19 college, you could easily do as a parent say, do you take or part school kids, home educated children? Do you get government funding for it? And then if a parent was interested in doing the route that I did at GCSE, there's some landscape there for them to take them out at whatever age, but no, there's that GCSE end to it that works really well for us. So because that is the worry when you home educate, just think, oh, how am I going to get them to do the exams? Where are they going to do the exams? And if you know in advance that you've got a local college or even school that will do something like that. I mean, some high schools, I believe, some secondary schools do part educate, and I don't know what the situation is since with COVID with children attending on a part-time basis because of different sort of SEN issues. But I know quite a lot of secondary schools, certainly at the time, weren't interested in my two wandering in and out on a part-time basis because it didn't look good for the other kids that were in there full-time. Well, why can't we do that? Well, you can, but that's not the model we want to follow. Whereas the 14, 19 college, they did have students going in part-time, although it was a very transient environment. So just having the two home educators wander in and do what they were doing they didn't stick out at all. So
no, that's really useful. Yeah,
but anybody can freedom of information request 14 or just get in touch with local authority to see where the local colleges are that do go from 14 to 19.
Well, I am very partial to the freedom of information request, Pippa, and it's all thanks to you. So you set me off on that path quite a few years back now, and I contacted you through Godfrey, and you were already a seasoned home educator, and I was just starting to do my research at that point, but I wasn't quite confident enough to stick to my guns because mine did want to go to secondary school with their friendship groups. So I did feel a little bit more pressure to follow that through, but it's all worked out well in the end.
So are they both? Are you home educating now?
Yes, both of them now. Yeah.
Oh, great!
They're
enjoying it.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. So it's all going well. And much like yourself, once you start digging around and finding the information out that you're not supposed to know, it certainly helps you make those difficult decisions, doesn't it? And break out of the mold.
It does, and also as well, you're sort of told or you're given the impression you're the only one that's doing it. And no, you're not. There's a whole community of lovely people out there that some kids have never even stepped foot in school. Some have, some haven't. Some have dipped in, some have done some years, some haven't. And they're a nicer bunch of people they're so different in all sorts of ways and views and abilities. And I mean, I can remember being sort of slightly horrified that they were mixing with some 8 or 9-year-olds that couldn't read, but my goodness, they were creative, they were imaginative, and I thought, well, and their parents were quite relaxed. Well, it'll come to them when it comes to them, and it doesn't. They were fine. They were absolutely fine. And another interesting thing as well, because under the Education Act, the local authority has a duty to make sure that children in their area are being educated, and so we had a visit, I said maybe once every 10 months, from a secondary school teacher from a high school further up the East Coast who were based in Hull. And I sort of said to the local authority, I don't mind having a secondary teacher, but could you send an educator rather than a secondary school teacher? Because I certainly, as a home educator, wouldn't go into a school and start marking a school teacher on their ability to teach, because it's completely different. So why would you have a school teacher come and look at my ability to educate? The local authority said, no, that's what you got given. So we got given it. And this guy was just lovely. And the first year he came, at the end of the first year, which was 2010, he sort of sat down with myself and my eldest and sort of said to Owen, he said, what's been your favourite topic this year that you've learned? And Owen, at 11 years old, went waxed lyrical all about the general election and the hustings and all the different political parties. And I was sat there thinking, we haven't done this. But what I'd done is I had in the background Radio 5 Live on during the day as we were home educating. And he'd just picked up on this. And
Yeah.
to hear an 11-year-old have a chat to a grown up about the political system, and just like, you do not know what they're capable of picking up and learning.
Yeah.
Even when you're not teaching them. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
gosh, he's now got, and he held his own with this teacher, and he was well impressed. It wasn't anything I'd primed my son to say, but it was really
Yeah.
interesting. And I can remember there was another session where we had the same guy for for 5 years that we were home educating. At the end of one session, he was sat at the kitchen table. We had this big kitchen table, and he sat with his head in his hands. And I said, have we done everything okay? Is everything all right? And he just looked at me and said, I wish I could do this with my children. And his children were in state
Yeah.
school. And I just thought, oh
Yeah.
gosh, that's coming
Yeah.
from a teacher, and I
Yeah.
just, I'm not saying that I was doing it completely. There's no right and wrong, really. You just have to really do what's right for the kids, and you can,
Yeah.
your parents, you know exactly what's right for your kids. So it's just
Yeah.
going to work, I think.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is it. I mean, the more I've looked into it and spoken to friends and family, a lot of it boils down to childcare, really, and the need for both parents to be out at work, um,
Yeah.
and and not having any other practical option of where to put the children. And I think, that's the sad truth of it. And if that's the situation people find themselves in, then you don't really want to know that there's problems at the school.
No, you don't, because you don't have an option, do you, but to send them anyway. And I myself was a peripatetic music teacher going in and out of various schools in Hull, and lot of good teachers in there, but the system could be much improved. And I sort of knew
So,
that when we went to secondary school, that they would be in that sort of 20
yeah.
to 60% where they were going to do okay. They weren't going to be in the gifted and talented where the school would push them and showcase them, and they weren't going to be in the bottom 20% where they were contestly. They'd just be the ones that would get left alone and probably get bored. And then I don't know, you've just got to keep them interested in it. And we did just get them really curious and kept them interested, and we were lucky sort of back then that screen time wasn't such an issue. And I can
Mm.
imagine, it's just responsibilities, and that it's there now, and it can be used for good or abused. And I think, it could be a very great asset to home educators now. I mean, certainly the resources that there are far better now, I think, than when we were home educating. But it is just a different time, and you go with what you've got at the time, don't you?
You do, you do. So that's all that was keeping you busy back then. And presumably you were still sending your freedom of information requests whilst you were home educating, or did you have a break from your campaigning whilst you were home educating, or were you balancing both at the same time?
So the reason why that I decided to home educate, because we're using biometric technology in schools to fingerprint children for school library books, primarily in primary schools, where my two were. So we managed to, me, myself, and Terry Doughty from Action and Rights for Children, and another couple of parents, with the help of Privacy International and No to ID, managed to get 3 clauses in the Protection of Freedoms Act, which was passed in 2011 and was enacted in 2012. So there was a slight overlap for a couple of years where I was trying to gather data from schools to see how prolific the technology was. And then in 2012, when the Protection of Freedom Act was passed, schools then had to specifically obtain parents' and children's consent to processing the fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, whatever they were using in school, which all of those were being used. And and everybody sort of rightly thought, oh, our job's done now. And so I thought, well, hang on a minute, who's going to make sure schools are actually doing this? So I kept an eye on it. And so as I was sort of keeping an eye on it, just seeing what was going on, there had been 10 years earlier, when I was looking at the fingerprinting and what was going on in American schools, there'd been an instance of a school in San Diego where they'd put active RFID chips, radio frequency tags, around kids' necks, and basically had a screen and could see where the kids were in real time. And I can remember thinking at the time, that's absolutely crazy. They're never going to do that in the UK. Anyway, to cut a long story short, there was a school in West Cheshire that had decided that it was a good idea to tag a few thousand of their students without telling them with an active RFID chip under this, what was Tony Blair's Building Schools for the Future program. And there was absolutely no mention about it in any press whatsoever. And I can remember sort of being not being bored, but sort of having done the job of biometrics. I can remember sort of Googling, I just wonder if that RFID technology has come to schools in the UK. And it was, you can find some really interesting Google results on page 28, 29, 30 of a search result. And I'd found an article in the International RFID Journal detailing this brand new technology that hadn't yet gone to market, that was still under research and development, that was being trialed at a school in Cheshire, West Cheshire College, again, a 14 to 19 school, one of these new schools that had been built under Tony Blair's Building Schools for the Future. And so I started sending them freedom of information requests on, well, how have you gained permission, because I was with the biometrics. I began to think, maybe we should have put RFID in the Protection of Freedoms Act as well as biometrics, so it stops schools from using that technology. So that's where I was coming from, thinking this has slipped through the net. Can we put an amendment in the Protection of Freedoms Act? Anyways, you could cut a very long story short. Basically, the company that had supplied the school with the chips, Zebra Technologies, had worked with Honeywell, who had built the school, and had embedded all these sensors into the school infrastructure, and just put these tags around the children's neck. But they'd sort of also put, well, here's your lunch tag, here's your bus pass, so the children were wearing 3 or 4 different tags, and one of them was this active RFID chip. And it was going out at about, I think it was 5 kilohertz. It was very high frequency. It was near Wi-Fi frequency, so it's like they were wearing a little router around their neck.
Right.
Goodness knows what the health implications of that is. Anyway, I started sending some information requests to the college, who were very reluctant to answer anything and obfuscated like there was no tomorrow. So I got the information commissioner involved. If anybody wants to see exactly what I asked, if you want to go to the website whatdotheyknow.com and search for Pippa King, West Cheshire College, there are a lot of requests and toing and froing, and so you can see the full story there. And I also have a website sort of dedicated to that called rfidinschools.com, where you can read about how these kids were the kids this day don't even know that ever happened, because the school never came clean. It got to the point where the Guardian had picked up the story and were going to run an article with it, and the red top newspapers, the Sun, had also picked it up. And so they basically rang the college and said, we want to do an article about this RFID technology that you're using on the kids, because they'd seen my freedom of information requests. And the college conveniently had decided that day to switch it off and abandon the technology, so the story never ran. The Guardian ran with it. So Wendy Grossman did an article in the Guardian online, which goes back, I think, back to 2013. So you can go back and read it. So that's my sort of interest in how kids were being tracked, surveilled, tested new technology on, because this RFID reader hadn't gone to market yet. It was still in research and development. So kids were just used as I know, it was awful. So the college had nobody knew about it really. And I'll say the kids to this day don't know about it. So I sort of focused on that for a couple of years after 2012. As far as I know, I don't think that technology is being used in UK schools or anywhere else. I mean, it's very controversial. But the biometric technology now in UK secondary schools is probably in between 80 to 85% prolific. So if you've got a child that goes to state education school, their fingerprints will be somewhere digitally. and we don't know. Nobody knows. I mean, both the school and the suppliers will say, well, it's only kept on the server. But if police, Home Office, Prevent feel the need to access that sort of biometric data from the school, they can do that without telling you, the parent, or I mean, the school will know about it, and the school doesn't necessarily have to tell you. And of course, now photographs, the School Information Management System, the SIM system, stores a school photograph, which now is a biometric identifier. The company called Cunningham's, who supply catering systems for secondary schools, are using sliding school photographs onto their facial recognition system to use as a basic template for the kids' faces to be compared against. And that is dubious under data protection, because that school photograph, as parents and children, is just for the school system, and it's just nothing for our records. But it's not actually, it's going somewhere else. And that particular technology, I can say with some confidence, again, has been gifted to schools. Schools haven't had to pay for it, much like the RFID technology, much like the iris recognition technology, because it's still under development. And it's that, so this particular facial recognition that's in schools at the moment has an algorithm that learns every 3 months from the child's changing face. There's nothing like that in that's to market at the moment. So I think I can say that I think I put my sort of learned opinion that again, these children in schools are being tested for different technologies. Another technology that was in to a secondary school in Wolverhampton was, I'm sure most people might have seen this, is the well, they say it's not facial recognition because they're not taking any photographs of the child, but the system is gauging how alert the child is. Is the head looking out of the window? Is the child smiling? Da, 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 da. So it was like an emotional engagement technology that they were, again, the school had been gifted from a company, and it was so I mean, that's not even looking at the data sharing that's going on with apps that I know that you've been concerned with, like the classroom sort of seating applications and stuff like that. I'm purely looking at the biometric stuff. And I think my concern is that the apps that are being used in schools are only as good as the data that's being input to them. One of the ways you can get more accurate data into there is to make it biometric. So at some point, I would think the natural progression for the apps in schools that are run by private companies are going to start using facial recognition, fingerprint data, because then it's an awful lot more accurate. And I can also see biometric data being in the long term linked up with the National Children's Database, which probably a lot of parents aren't even aware of. I don't know if, I mean, you know about the National Children's Database, National Pupil Database, sorry, where all schools feed into a huge database that's been running for over 30 years now, that's got millions of pupils' data on it. You know, all the exam data, all the SATs data, all your attendance data, where you live, whether you're in your parents are in the armed forces, it's vast. And so again, this sort of data collection was one of the reasons I learned an awful lot about what schools do. Was one of the reasons I had my kids out of the state sector. I thought, I do not want, you know, I'm neither left nor right wing. I'm a very libertarian, very small government, leave me alone sort of person. And that, I don't care what you want to do. You fill your boots, but you know, let me be private with my kids, and let me be private if I want to be. And that's very much where I was sort of coming from with the biometrics. And you know, if you want to have, you know, RFID tag kids with radio frequency that nobody knows how healthy that is, if you want your kids to do that, but not for me. The problem with that sort of technology is, of course, if my kid decided not to wear a tag, they're sitting next to a child less than a foot away from them that is. So in that point, in that sort of sense, that opt-out then becomes, you know, okay, well, your data's not being shared.
It's the behavioral grooming, isn't it, that it's normalized. So even if you manage to, like you say no, thank you, not for my child, they're surrounded by that surveillance and that reminder and that normalized sort of digitalized behavior. And they can't, you know, that in itself is doing something to our children. It's not as simple as just saying, For example, if it's gender ideology and a child in your class is presenting in a different way, your child is also having to participate in that as well. It's not easy for the other children.
No, that's right. I mean, completely using biometrics is a especially fingerprint biometrics. It's a conscious interaction with something that, pardon me, taking your data. And I've always sort of said, if you've got money in your hand, and you can decide in a canteen to go and spend it somewhere, that's your decision. But if the institution, the school's got your money, and the only way you can access that is to give a fingerprint, then that balance of power is very subtly changed. And under GDPR, the processing of children's biometrics is absolutely not allowed at all. They tried it in Bulgaria, in Poland, and in Sweden, in France. In France, Sweden, and Bulgaria, they tried facial recognition. And in Poland, they were fingerprinting kids for a canteen system, which like they do in most secondary schools in the UK. All those schools have been fined thousands of euros for doing that. Our information commissioner will not do that in the UK. We different privacy groups, myself, we don't know why. It could be that because our Protection of Freedoms Act says it's up to the parents and the child, so we are the only country in the world to have sort of national permissions for using biometrics in schools. Some of the individual states in America do, a handful, but no other country has that, because we were the first, because we were really the first country to have that technology in schools. But because we've got this, we've got a choice in Protection of Freedoms Act, and GDPR absolutely says no, we've got a conflict. So the Information Commissioner is there to uphold data protection, which is this freedom to choose whether or not you partake in biometric systems, but also have to uphold GDPR. So I'm in a bizarre situation at the moment where I helped bring in these 3 clauses in the Protection of Freedoms Act to get permission for parents and children to say no to biometrics in schools or yes. I'm in the bizarre position now where myself and a colleague are thinking, well, now perhaps we need to repeal that, so that the Information Commissioner can go straight ahead and along with GDPR and actually ban the systems in schools. I'll say we've got 2 conflicting bits of legislation, and the one that gives permission needs to go. So that would be an interesting process for me to have campaigned for legislation and now to campaign to get it removed, because the rest of the legislation is grown up.
That in itself demonstrates how rushed and irresponsible the whole process is, and how little is understood about it. Because even when you say you're campaigning to put the safeguards in place, the safeguards themselves have problems. The layers of problems. It's like, what did I hear somebody say the other day about what's the best way of giving children heroin? It's what's the safest way? The safest way is not to do it that at all, isn't it? It's just it's stupid.
Yeah, and also as well, I mean, the schools will say, well, kids forget PIN numbers, and kids ever forgotten a PIN number to an iPad or a phone? It's crazy. And if they forget PIN numbers, how on earth are they going to pass GCSEs? It's crazy. But I mean, yeah. So going back to the home education, that's why we home educated, just to take my kids out of that whole system. I mean, they're in it, they're back in it now. They went to university, completely happy, both of them now, say in their late 20s. Not regretting at all. I can remember my youngest son once saying to me at the end of being home educated, "Mum, I never had access to girls," which is just like a teenage kid thing. But that was the only comment I had.
Yeah, that's funny actually. That's what my youngest has said the same about. I'll never get a boyfriend.
But I think there's a lot more home educators now than there were when I was home educating, so 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. So, and for a lot of many reasons. So I think it's a lot healthier landscape. I mean, it was a very healthy landscape when I was doing it, but I can see, lots more kids coming
opportunities.
Together. The opportunities. Yeah. So how many children are? Is it? Because I think it must be about 700,000. Is it about 750,000 that are out?
I don't know. I don't have the number to hand, but it is just it's growing rapidly, the numbers of people that are taking their children out, because the schools are not fit for purpose, like you say, for many reasons. But fundamentally, that is the, it's not able to cater to your child's needs. So yeah, there's lots of people that are home educating, and the private, obviously the private schools are now um, having to pay the VAT, the 20% increase. So that's going to impact lots of families that were just able to afford that, and now are potentially looking at home education as an alternative for their children.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we said the two subjects I paid for when we were home educating were maths and obviously music and trumpet and trombone. I couldn't teach that. So, but everything else we pretty much did from textbooks and some amazing YouTube videos that the boys found and stuff that was online at the time. But I can imagine if you were spending some money on private school fees, if you had to replace that with home education and tutors, I imagine the cost would be less than the private school fees.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, but
It's
but
food for thought. Yeah.
but if you, I know suddenly at the end of COVID, there was a rush for local authorities to be hiring home educating members of their sort of team, and they were looking at hiring two or three. So the local authorities have certainly seen, or that gives an indication that they've seen a lot of kids deregister, and they were hiring these people as a consequence. I mean, I haven't done any freedom of information requests to see what proportion are now not on register as opposed to were maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but I would imagine, judging by the amount of people that they were advertising for, I think it's over, must be over 500,000 kids out of the education system now being home educated, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, they're not going to let that go without a challenge for long, are they? So that's the next difficulty that we face is what's coming down the path.
So are they planning to make homeschoolers register somewhere now?
Yes, yeah. So
Okay, so
the well-being bill is all tied into a register, and there's quite a few additional parts to that bill that is quite intrusive about finding out what you're teaching, and speaking to your child and seeing evidence of work. So um, a lot more checks that we currently don't have, which
mm,
would be and obviously the register itself, like you were saying, with the extra data gathering and tying it into your NHS records and all of the
mm.
rest of it. So there's a lot of things to keep an eye on.
I mean, it's interesting. Before we were home educating, I understood that parents that were home educating could apply to the local authority for some form of grant to help home educate their kids, because each child walking into school has about £2,000 to £3,000 of funding that goes with that. Of course, you don't get that as a home educator, which would be really handy for tutors. And then that stopped. And I think, although it disgruntled some home educators, a lot of them just thought that's great, because if they're not going to pay us, then we're not accountable for them. And at the moment, if you're not accountable and you're not being given government money for that, other than the fact all they have to do is make sure a child is be educated, then really, if they're starting to throw different restrictions upon you and you're having to adhere to that, then I think there would be a healthy argument for saying, well, just give us some money then so we can do what you're going to tell us to do, which isn't ideal, because the whole point of home educating is you want them out the system. You don't want to create a new system. You
Mm.
want the freedom to be able to do what you want. But I know, in this country, we are lucky that we can still home educate. Certainly in some European countries, it's illegal. So we need to keep that freedom to be able to do
Absolutely.
that. Absolutely.
Mm. So, Pippa, is there anything else that you're up to at the moment with regards to the biometrics in the schools?
Let's say I'm just looking at whether or not repealing those clauses of the Protection of Freedoms Act would trigger the Information Commissioner to enact the GDPR. Well, it would make him put pressure on them to enact GDPR. So I think I've got a meeting in the next month with maybe Liberal Democrat MP to pursue that and have a look at some, maybe access some constitutional lawyers that could advise. Actually, I can't afford to employ anybody, but some of the sort of parties do. So that's what we're sort of looking at the moment. My other head scratching thing is that I know we've got this facial technology in schools that's being supplied by Cunningham's. They are a point of sale till company. They're a retail company. They don't develop facial recognition technology. That's coming from somewhere else and I don't know where. So that's one of my sort of research projects at the moment, is to find out exactly who is making this technology that's being used in over 100 schools now in the UK, that's learning from kids changing faces. So yeah.
I mean, I mean, my experience at school with the apps, it was very obvious to me that this was a digital ID template.
Yeah.
So it's the fact that this technology has been tested on our school children is it's mind blowing, and I don't think many parents have any idea because they're not supposed to. Let's face it.
Of course, of course.
Um,
So
it's
it's interesting because under GDPR or our current data protection, any parent that goes to any school that has a child that goes to school is in charge of that child's data up to the age of 16. So if you want to know what information the school or what data the school has on your child, you can ask the school to give under subject access request to list all the data it has on your child, and then you could further ask who is sharing this data with, and then you could go to that company and say, who are you sharing this data with? And the tendrils that go out are unbelievable. And there's another parent called Jen Pearson who runs Defend Digital Me, and she sort of got wind of the National Pupil Database, of which many parents and even schools don't know exists, but that's a huge amalgamation of every single pupil in an educational setting apart from home educators, where it's put in this massive database that a company called RM Education managed for the Department of Education. And that data was opened up, I think probably about 10 years ago. The Department of Education thought, well, this would be a good idea. We can open up the database for research purposes. It's the largest data set of children, now adults and children in the world globally that has that much information. So countries all over the world and private corporations come and research the data on the database. And the Department of Education has been giving raw data out on children to corporations. Betting companies was one. The army was another. Where are all the male kids that aren't achieving academically? We want a list of them so we can target them to join the army. That sort of thing. And if you go and look at defenddigitalme.com, it's a big website, but I mean Jen is amazing. She's dedicated to sort of uncovering where that data goes to and who's accessing it. And again, another reason why we decided to home educate. It's toe curling. Your kids aren't in school for just an education. There's a whole other thing happening in education at the moment.
There was one head teacher that said to me after my daughter brought home a very, very inappropriate school library book. And in defence, one of the things that she said was, we are preparing children for the world we live in. And it just sent shivers down my spine then, and it still does now. But it was the most honest thing that anybody had said to me in that meeting. And I completely believe every word of it, that's what they're doing. It's just not the world that we want for them, is it?
No, and also so we can prepare our children for the world that we want to shape for them, that they want to shape. I mean, they're going to shape the world, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think inherently and instinctively, you sort of know what's good and bad. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid and Jim Will Fix It was on, even I knew when I was watching the telly that there was something wrong with that guy,
Yeah,
And
yeah,
kids is very intuitive, and
yeah.
that is sort of beaten out of them through the state education system that home education lets run wild, I think. And in being intuitive, I think, especially in the age of artificial intelligence and the amount of data that's out there, you need to have a nose that can sniff out, does this smell right? And I think home educated kids, I think, stand a better chance of being able to do that than kids that learn in a box.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Pippa. I think that's a really fantastic note to end on. Where
Thank you.
can where can people find you if you want to just run through, and we'll put it in the link as well
Okay.
at the end.
So I have a website called Biometrics in Schools. If you search for that, it should come up. But that link is pippaking.blogspot.com, because I started it way back in Blogspot days in 2005. RFIDinschools.com is the sort of story of how that particular technology found its way into the UK once, I think. And I'm on X. It's Pippa__ King. And I think that's about it. I don't do anything.
That's
But it's been
fantastic.
lovely. Thank you, Emma, for
Thank you.
it's been good.
Good to catch up, Pippa. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Bye.